been looking forward to coming over and doing this program for you folks. In my program description that was in the newsletter, I had mentioned that I retired in July of 2021, and I've spent a lot of time sorting slides that I have taken through the years, and have put together several programs. One that you guys saw earlier on Railfanning in the 80s, and it was primarily, that was all diesel. And that wasn't actual, I had a projector and slides. But for the STEAM program, I decided to just scan the slides, and I've really enjoyed the editing process in Photoshop and kind of cleaning stuff up slides that I took years ago. Nothing was more frustrating than spending a whole weekend driving hundreds of miles, chasing steam engine. You come home, send the slides off, they come back, and you look at them and said, well, that doesn't look as good as what I remember. So now with the digital process and some editing, I've had a chance to clean a lot of that stuff up and make them more presentable than what they would have been just the original slides. Little background. I mentioned also in the promo that opportunities that are not available today that were available in the 80s, and we'll get into the Norfolk Southern Steam program that ran for many years and was very, very helpful to a lot of people all over the country. Most of this crowd, were you guys in this area in the 80s? Primarily everybody? Here in North Carolina, we were very fortunate, particularly if having the north-south Atlanta, Washington main line. Not only did we see a lot of trips in the area, but there were a lot of ferry moves after the trips that went right through our backyard. A lot of them. A lot of what I took pictures of were some of the ferry moves. I knew if a trip ran round trip from Greensboro to Lynchburg, came back to Greensboro, spent the night, I had a schedule knowing where they were going to be the next week. So I knew at some point that week there was going to be a ferry move of that to get the train to the next point. So those were a lot of opportunities as well. My background in getting interested in all this is I was born in Welch, West Virginia, McDowell County, Welch, West Virginia, right on the Pocahontas division of the Norfolk and Western. I got in on the very end of steam. We'll go back to that. There's one of my prized possessions. My father took this picture. That's the Welch Depot. That's me in the cab of 475 in 1956. The Norfolk NW shops kind of retrofitted 475, kind of dolled it up to make it look older than what it was, and it would tour the system for special events. If a community was having a centennial program or old-timey days or whatever, it went throughout the system. And if you see pictures of the 1957 convention in Roanoke, you'll see, it was back in service, but it still retained some of the frills that the shop had put on it. And fortunately, it's still running today in Strasburg. And that's J605 side of it. And like I said, my dad took this. This was in, not even a whole city block from where we lived, downtown Welch, in an apartment. So the passenger schedule then was 6 trains a day, all pulled by J's, 3 east, 3 west, including the Powhatan era. And so even though I was young, most of what I remember of the time period was just a few of the pictures that my dad took. So that kind of set the stage. And then when 611 was rebuilt in 1982 and came out, it kind of, all of a sudden, all those childhood memories is like, oh, wow. I remember that. So, so we'll back up just a second here. The Norfolk Southern Steam Program, you don't, have to realize how extensive it was. This was the 1984 initial schedule, and this is signed by James Weisslein, who was the manager of the steam program until Carl Jensen took over years later. But I waited, this was mailed out. You could get on the mailing list, and this schedule would come out in March, and it would run pretty much through 1st of November. From April to 1st of November, they were running trips somewhere on the NS system with either 4501, the FP7 diesels, 611, then 1218. And it was very, very extensive. And the logistics of putting all this together and having a consist at one location and then going to another and scheduling. And you'll see all.
I cannot read that. What is that?
Oh, I know, it's kind of far away. This particular one started April the 7th and ran, this is through September.
What is it? Schedule of what?
Schedule of all the scheduled excursions all over the system. It had where they were running from, the date, the chapter or organization that sponsored it, and then the equipment or the power that was going to be used on it.
How many different locomotives did they have in 87?
In 87, they had
611
and 1218 came out in April of 87. Okay. And then they had the FP7s that they would use where they couldn't take the steam engines. And 4501, even the L&N 152 was running trips earlier in the schedule. And it all started with 4501 years ago. So, and that was just a sample. This was the 87 schedule when 1218 came out, and it runs from March was the first trip, the end of March through the end of November. And all this had to be organized, and all the chapters and organizations had to schedule and start advertising and print tickets and make sure they had enough coaches and equipment. And it went on for almost 30 years. And when they made a very quick decision in 1994 to cancel the program, it left a lot of these organizations holding the bag because they had acquired equipment. The Greensboro chapter bought passenger cars and ran in these excursions. And after the excursions were over, well, what are we going to do with these passenger cars? So it generated a lot of money. It generated a lot of publicity. It ran very successful for many years. The only incident was in 1986 on a Norfolk Southern company employee trip through the Dismal Swamp toward Norfolk is when they had the only accident of any major consequence. 611 was the engine, but the derailment happened further back in the consist. And all right, so this is from 1979 in the original Wasena Park Roanoke Railroad Museum before it became the Virginia Museum of Transportation. We left West Virginia in 1963, moved to Winston-Salem. I never thought a thing about trains for 20 years, just being that different of a location. Susan, my wife, worked for a company in Winston-Salem that had an office, a branch in Roanoke. We went to Roanoke for a company picnic, and just in the general conversation, they found out, okay, I'm from Welch. I had an interest in trains. And somebody said, well, do you know they have one of the J locomotives in the museum here? I had no idea. So this was in 1979. We went over and took a couple pictures. And I'm sure at this time they were well underway of making plans to pull this out of the museum. And so that kind of ignited the interest again for me, and we started taking pictures. Some of the pictures you'll see tonight, Susan took, because we used to tag team. We would chase all weekend. We'd work all week, chase all weekend. She would take some video. I would take video. She'd take slides. I took slides. When we did pacing scenes, video-wise, I drove and she hung out the window, filming the pacing scenes. The primary locomotives during this period, these slides cover 1982 to 1989. Was 4501 to 282 that belongs to the Chattanooga, down Chattanooga to the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum. 1218 came out late April 1987. We enjoyed many years of the New River train from Huntington, West Virginia to Hinton, behind nickel plate 765, the 284. For 3, 4, 5 years in a row, we were up there. We would go up, drive up after work on a Friday night, spend the night, ride on Saturday, chase on Sunday, and drive home, get up and go to work Monday morning. That's just what we did. Nickel plate 587, which is a 282. They brought that engine in, and it ran for a year or so on excursions. You'll see several pictures of that. The black and white pictures I have here of this is C&O 2716, which is a 284. C&O called them canalas, like for the Kanawha River area. Before 611 was rebuilt, the excursion program had gotten so big and the consist had grown, they needed a bigger power than 4501. So they borrowed this, took it to the Southern steam shops, and Southernized this 282, this C&O engine. Both the 2716 and the previous picture, the nickel plate 587, are now in the hands of the Kentucky Steam Heritage out in Irvine, Kentucky, and their 2716 is pretty close to being rebuilt and back in service. And they're going to do the same thing to the nickel plate 587. But these black and white, these were black and white negatives. The time this came into Winston-Salem, I had black and white film in the camera, and I didn't get any slides of it, but the black and white pictures turned out really nice. This is down at 3rd and Patterson Street in Winston-Salem, which all this has been changed. One of the early engines you don't see a whole lot of was the Southern 722, which is a little 280. And this was one of the engines that they acquired from the East Tennessee and Western North Carolina, Tweetsie. This was number 208 in the East Tennessee, Western North Carolina. And this was
locomotives ran well into the 1960s in revenue service.
Yeah, they double-headed this in 630, which is also now operating in Chattanooga at the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum. And they did a lot of double-headed trips just because they needed the power. But this was the only time that we saw this engine. We went to the museum in Tennessee and hung around and rode. And they either felt sorry for us or realized we were something other than just people off the street. So here it is turning to head back to the depot, and both Susan and I got a cab ride back to the depot.
Is that you in front?
No. That engine was on display in Asheville for a while, and the last I heard, it's up at Bryson City or Dillsboro on the Great Smoky Mountain in pieces.
I think I just saw another today, but almost got it back.
Oh, good.
Hey, question, why do they keep changing the style of the engine? Why all these different numbers, and different,
Oh,
you know, and two?
each railroad, built an engine for whatever purpose they needed it.
But they keep changing the design of it.
These were just light, small engines that couldn't pull a whole lot of tonnage.
You like Cadillacs and Oldsmobiles and,
Yeah, right,
you know,
exactly.
Ford Fairlanes, yeah,
That's for selling purposes.
so this would be a Cadillac.
Yeah, Mercedes. One of the things that I was fortunate enough to get to do during this time period, being from Welch, I got to ride at least 2 trips through Welch behind 611 and got to photograph it several times. This is the west side of the Welch Tunnel. He's just exited the tunnel, crossing the Tug River, headed west. Look what Spencer looked like back in 1987. It looked like a desolate place. This is the Buffalo Creek and Golly #4 engine that Spencer had for a while as number 604. And that's the Barber Junction station. And I was just down there for the train show Saturday. I've been down there a number of times, but it's almost unrecognizable for how it's built up very nicely since 1987.
So that building is the one where you get on the train to
Yeah.
ride around?
Yeah,
So that's a parking lot to the left. Wow.
yeah.
That's the station from Barber Junction, where the line out of Winston-Salem that goes down to Charlotte crosses the main line from Salisbury to Asheville.
And that's a little, 280. And this engine is now at Cass. It's going to be, they're going to rebuild it and run on the new open part of the track that they just opened, the old CNO that parallels the river from Cass up to Durban. And they bought this engine specifically to run on that section of track, and that just opened this past season, that section of track, which was, 280. Yeah, it was Buffalo Creek and Golly #4. And I don't exactly know, I've heard they were going to when they rebuilt it, they were going to take it back to the Buffalo Creek and Golly look, but that line has been out of service since 1985. We'll see a little more on that here later. The Roanoke chapter ran many, many trips during that time period. They used to run an Independence Limited, which was an extended trip. This particular trip ended in Roanoke, but it started in Cleveland. It ran from Cleveland to Portsmouth, Ohio to Bluefield, Bluefield to Roanoke. My brother and I drove to Portsmouth and caught it coming into Portsmouth, and we spent the night and chased it from Portsmouth to Bluefield, and then chased it again the next day from Bluefield into Roanoke. Yeah, this was 1989. Oh, this was,
US 52.
You don't want to run an interstate. They
oh
don't
yeah,
really-
one from Portsmouth or Canova, it's Highway 52 parallels it all the way to Bluefield. Well, I mean, obviously it's not side by side, but But that give you an extent of some of the trips that were run. You know, you could get on in Bluefield or you could get on in Cleveland and ride the whole thing. But they did a lot of double heading, and this is that nickel plate 587 engine that double headed all the way from Cleveland. And you'll see several different pictures of this configuration. Some of the pictures I've put in here in just random order. You know, they're not in, you know, the exact order that they were shot or exact, you know, geographic locations coming from one point to the other. But this was them backing into the depot after they got to Roanoke. Also in September 1989, the Roanoke chapter ran a 40th anniversary Powhatan era trip. The original Powhatan era with the streamlined coaches was debuted in 1949. And so for this trip, they got rid of the tool car and the auxiliary water tender and only ran Tuscan red coaches just to commemorate the anniversary of the Powhatan era. Saturday morning, they ran Roanoke to past Christiansburg to Walton, turned around and went back, and in the afternoon, they went to Lynchburg and back. I was only able to do the morning trip, and it poured rain the whole time. It just, you know, but it still made for some nice images. This is standing on the bridge on Highway 460 at Ripplemead, Virginia, and that's the New River, and this train is headed to Bluefield. That wasn't mine, but I wished I had one at the time.
It looks like a 2x4.
That was Bill Cecil's. Bill Cecil, Roanoke.
It was at Bill Cecil's?
Is he there?
Yes.
Oh,
I have no idea. I'm sure I've probably seen that, but I've forgotten.
One of the major events for rail fans in 1985 was the Ross Rowland talking the Chesapeake and Ohio into, or Chessie at the time, into running his engine 484-614 for the whole month of January in the middle of West Virginia to test it for a possible newer version of a coal-fired steam engine, because at the time oil prices had spiked, so they were looking for alternatives. And Ross had the money and owned the engine. And for the whole month of January 1985, this engine alone by itself would pull about 100 loaded coal cars from Huntington, West Virginia to Hinton, spend the night. The next day it would take empties back to Hinton. And this is the one where we paced. We went up for just one day, and it was snow flurries. And this is where I made Susan hang out the window while we paced 614 down Highway 70, Interstate 77 through Charleston. But
if you want to see this locomotive, it's now parked at the C&O Historical Society Museum and Complex in Clifton Forge.
yeah. This was a turning. At the time, there was still a operating turntable at Hinton. And this was that night turning. And it wasn't a drag. It wasn't just running 30 miles an hour. They were working that engine. This is the nickel plate 765. For several years prior to the New River train, they ran a private charter for the USF&G, United States Federal and Guarantee Company, which helped them pay for the ferry move to get the engine from their home down to West Virginia. And they would leave Hinton with a short consist and stop along the way for supplies and arrive at White Sulphur Springs at exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon. to drop off these people to go to the Greenbrier Hotel. Then the engine would proceed on to Clifton Forge and turn before it went back to pick them up. But this was at Clifton Forge. We chased it and it got dark, and just a nice night shot I was able to get while it was in the yard there. It's St. Albans crossing the Coal River, coming into St. Albans, West Virginia. Then in 1987, I guess a railfan dream came true. We found out that they were going to pull 1218 out of the Wasena Park Museum in Roanoke, take it to Birmingham, and hopefully get it overhauled. And this is a shot from the First Street Bridge that went over Wasena Park.
Skip school that day to go see it.
And
What's that red hose or whatever it is? right?
that's the airline, because the engine wasn't operable, so they had to run the airline to help with the braking. And they put in this panel track. You see the track back here behind it. That's the Roanoke belt line, and they pulled it all the way around the belt line through the yard and positioned it at the old passenger station, which is now the Link Museum, just for display for a little while. But this was in May of 1985. Very fortunate that this happened when it did, because end of October, 1st of November 1985 was the great flood that flooded Roanoke and everything down the Greenbrier. It's what took out the track at Cass. It flooded, the track downtown Roanoke, the Roanoke River. And had this engine still been on display, and when that flooding hit, this is what would have happened to it. That's the C&O H8 2666. And you see this panel track right here where I've got the era. That's where 1218 sat until they took it out of the museum. The water pushed this engine up against the bridge support. And totally wiped out the museum. That's when they had to eventually move to the location they have now, downtown Roanoke, and changed it to the Virginia Museum of Transportation.
It's hard to believe that the water would move that engine.
Oh, I know. That engine's now on display in Baltimore at the B&O Railroad Museum. 1218 crossing the bridge at Alta Vista, Virginia, heading north toward Lynchburg. This is the engine, excuse me, westbound. It's just cresting the Blue Ridge grade, the westbound Blue Ridge grade, headed for Roanoke. That little bridge is still there. It's still a nice place to shoot pictures from. I wouldn't advise going down where I shot this picture from now, but they don't take too kindly to that in 2023. This was some of the first runs of 1218. This is westbound at Salem, Virginia. Another shot of 2716 in Winston-Salem. Here's a shot of 4501 coming down the Shenandoah Division at Buena Vista, Virginia, headed for Roanoke. And you can see behind the cab, between the cab and the tender, you can see some figures there. This engine at the time was not built with an automatic stoker to advance the coal from the tender to the engine. So when you ran an excursion with this engine, they had two people all day long shoveling coal for this engine when they ran excursions with it. When Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum acquired it, when they rebuilt it, it now has an automatic stoker in it. This is northbound coming through Walkertown, just out of Winston-Salem. That's the old freight station in Walkertown, which is still there. 1985 was the first year Susan and I went to Strasbourg. You know, just threw in this picture of the Pennsy M1B. It was sitting outside. I think it's still sitting outside on display. Talking about overkill for power. 1218 and 611 pretty much just coasting. This is again the trestle at Alta Vista. They're coming south out of Lynchburg. This was shot in Asheville. They had just arrived, excursion had just arrived in Asheville. Here's early morning in Barbersville, West Virginia, with one of the New River trains behind 765. The sun is just touching the tops of the trees and the top of the smoke plume. But right out of Huntington, they made track speed. You know, most of these trains ran with 30 coaches behind that one engine, and it would run whatever top track speed was, 60, 65 miles an hour on the level. Going through the gorge, it did, New River Gorge, it didn't run that fast, but loved riding those trips. That's when you could stand at the vestibule all day long and just listen to that engine work. 611 south down at Belmont. In August of 1987, 611 went down for its 5-year boiler inspection. And they ran a one-way trip from Charlotte to Atlanta to get the engine headed back toward Birmingham, Alabama for the inspection. And my brother and I got a couple of pictures of it going south. This is an eastbound at Blue Ridge grade, and you can see the coaches are still on the grade, but 611's topped the grade and be coasting downhill from here on. This was a nice overnight shot of that doubleheader coming from Cleveland and Portsmouth, Ohio. This is in Bluefield. Lots of coal and open top car haulers. Bluefield coming into Bluefield Yard. Caught 611 and 1218. Different dates, of course, but you don't see those kind of coal waiting to go east anymore if you go to Bluefield. New River train, he's crossing over from Main 1 to Main 2 to make a station stop in Charleston, West Virginia. Classic C&O cantilever signals. This is 611 leaving Chattanooga, crossing the Tennessee River and the Ten Bridge. Early in the morning.
Any idea what year that was?
It was probably early on, probably 84, 85. This is Cotton Hill, West Virginia, deep in the New River Gorge. The 765 blasting upgrade. This is upgrade at this point. The New River is on the right, out to the right of the picture. This was before they painted all the coaches in Tuscan red. This is 611 coming into Crewe, Virginia from Norfolk. And if it didn't have the auxiliary water tender, it would look like one of the original Southern N&W run-throughs where N&W would take over the Southern passenger train on part of the trip. Because those are all the old stainless steel Southern cars. This is just west of Roanoke, crossing the Roanoke River out near Wabun, Virginia. And this is 587 on the little ferry move with a few freight cars. They stopped in Danville. This is Danville, Virginia. They had to do a little maintenance on the running gear. This is coming again south from Lynchburg. This is Salisbury, North Carolina. This was early morning. They were putting a train together, a double header with the nickel plate 587 and 1218. This was before the depot was redone down in Salisbury, and they used to have service tracks over to the side of the main line, double track main line here. And that was a very frequent stopover for a lot of ferry moves where they would come into Salisbury, spend a night, and then head out the next day. So it was a good place to catch a lot of the action. And there's later in the day on the S line headed for Asheville. And of course, the 1987 NRHS convention in Roanoke, the famous side-by-side run up the main line, up Christiansburg grade. This is at Elliston, Virginia, where they started the side-by-side up the mountain. This is somewhere along the New River between Glen Lynn and headed toward Roanoke. This is North Elm Street at Greensboro. This is the southern office building there in the background. It's obviously before the new depot was built. 4501 pretty much at speed coming through Gretna, Virginia, coming south toward Greensboro. And another New River train coming through Handley, West Virginia, which used to be a big division point on the C&O between Russell, Kentucky, and Hinton, West Virginia. Tracks were still there, but all this is gone now. I think the coaling tower still stands, but pretty much deserted from the mid-80s on. Another shot of 614. They were stopped here to do a little service, and we got a little bonus while we were waiting. The eastbound Cardinal came by. This is the view from Hawks Nest, West Virginia, Hawks Nest State Park. Beautiful place, but it's a really nice place to take some train pictures. This is the morning eastbound New River train at Hawks Nest. And then if you were lucky enough that they left Hinton early enough before the sunset, you got to catch the westbound coming back. This is a 10-mile-an-hour curve on the C&O there at Hawks Nest.
You know, Steve, that curve that goes across the bridge there, that was out of service for a while, but it's back in service, and Pam and I just crossed it coming back on the Cardinal from
Oh, all right.
So it was really exciting to be able to go along the river and all of a sudden go across. And by the way, for anybody who has not been to Hawks Nest State Park, it is wonderful. It's just it really is a delightful place to go, and you can actually have dinner in the Hawks Nest restaurant, the hotel, have a view pretty similar to this while you're having dinner. Unfortunately, it won't be
a steam truck. Yes.
But it's still an exciting place to enjoy a nice meal.
And it's a double track main line until you get to this point, and it's split. And one line went on one side of the river, the other line on the other, because it was so narrow they couldn't get the double track all on one side. So it splits up to a point called Sewell, West Virginia, where it comes back together. This is a nice series I shot of 4501, and you can really see the crew back in cab working hard. But this was just south of High Point, and was able to catch it a couple more times in High Point. And the reason being is because they slowed down and actually came to a stop on the main line just shy of the depot to let Amtrak 80 come into the station. They're actually stopped there on the main line and waited for the Amtrak train to clear the station before they continued on.
This will be the same train we'll be riding here in about a month from tonight. If, again, if anybody can join us, we will not be seeing, as we've mentioned before, we won't be seeing any steam engines. It'll be a nice day.
We can imagine.
Yeah.
Here's a shot on the New River train in Hinton when the turntable was still operational. That was always a big draw. People would come down, watch them turn the engine. This went on until 85, 86, somewhere in that time frame. And then Chessie took out the turntable. So from then on, the steam-powered New River train, 12 miles west of Hinton was Meadow Creek, where they had a branch line that formed a Y track where they could turn the steam engine. And the branch line was the NF&G, the Nicholas, Fayette, and Greenbrier, which was half owned by C&O and half owned by New York Central, and ran up to Raynell, West Virginia. And real interesting. So here's 765 in another year coming up. This would have been the southwest leg of the Y coming up to turn. But because of this move, they would turn it, back it into Meadow Creek, service it, cold water, and then back it 12 miles to Hinton to reconnect to the train, which made for a real nice shot. I got lucky and caught it one year backing up.
Tower's still there, with no tracks to it.
Yeah. The main line, and I think one side track, one passing track is all that's left in Hinton Yard. And the last time I was there, that coaling tower, as big as it is, was just about to be completely overgrown with vegetation. This is Superior, West Virginia, the Huger Twin Tunnels. This is just east of Welch. This was another favorite spot when we were chasing the New River train. This is Hurricane, West Virginia. And you can just tell by the smoke plume, he was, they always came through Hurricane at top track speed. He was really putting on a show. Uh, 4501 up at Hurt, just south of Alta Vista, coming south. And that's just a little further south from that previous picture. Coming down Highway 29. This is Yeager, West Virginia, where the Dry Fork branch came off of the main line, the Pocahontas main line. And the train had been backed up into the yard. And just classic N&W. .4501 still rolling on the Shenandoah branch coming toward Roanoke. The Winston-Salem chapter got an authorized tour of Linwood Yard back in the 80s. And just so happened the day that we were down there, you see up in the middle right, there's all the FP7 diesels, and 611 came in and spent the night at Linwood Yard on a ferry move. That's taken from the tower, Linwood. And the weather was crummy, which we pretty much figured at any time it was raining, there must be a steam engine running because the weather never hardly cooperated. This is the double head 587 and 1218 headed for Asheville. This is in Marion at Clinch Cross. This is where the connection with the Clinchfield Railroad is. The Southern goes over the Clinchfield at Marion. And this is another shot I had envisioned for a long time and set up for that's 611 coming back from Asheville, crossing the Clinchfield. That's the old Marion Depot on the Clinchfield. And during the 1987 NRHS convention, again, out of Roanoke, another day they ran 1218 with a passenger train into Bluefield. 611 was waiting to take the passenger train back to Roanoke. They turned 1218 and ran it back to Roanoke with hopper cars. Nice shot coming through Morganton on the way to Asheville. You have to remember this was before Google Maps, cell phones. When these schedule for these trips came out, and Susan can well tell you, I had a complete set of Virginia state maps, half of West Virginia, North Carolina. We would sit down and plot out where we could get to from one shot to the next, you know. And if anybody got in our way, too bad.
Winston Lake would have been proud of you.
This is that ferry move from Charlotte down to Asheville. This is somewhere south of Charlotte. Of all the pictures and locations I could remember, I could not remember exactly where this was, but I do know what trip it was. But here is a classic, and I'll tell on myself. This is what you can do with Photoshop. This picture, the original slide, was a washed out, white, overcast summer day. There was no sky. So I made it look a little better than what it originally did. (1218's) inaugural trip after it was overhauled out of Roanoke went to Bluefield on Saturday under torrential rain. The actual railroad flooded. Signals were out. They were spiking switches ahead of this train just to make sure that there wasn't any issues. The New River in Glen Lynn was, you know, almost up to the banks, almost at track level. And Mr. Clater was bound and determined he was going to run this train from Bluefield, you know, from Roanoke to Bluefield, and he continued on. But just out of Roanoke, climbing the Christiansburg grade at Shawsville, they had a problem with one of the coaches and had to stop this 20+ car train on the grade, on the Christiansburg grade. They stopped it right around on the other side of this cut. And this is one of my favorite experiences of the whole steam era, is the sight and sound of them starting this engine on the grade. And you can tell there's steam everywhere, and just absolutely phenomenal. The trip back from Bluefield for 611 in the passenger train, they made it interesting for the rail fans with some rare mileage. coming out of Bluefield, they got to Narrows and they crossed over the New River onto the old Virginian main line and ran Virginian main line into Roanoke. And this is the connecting bridge. The NW is on the other side of the river. This is at Natural Bridge Station up on the Shenandoah Division. This is the James River, and the C&O is right underneath here. This is 4501 headed south. This is on Old Highway 70, the old Statesville Highway between Salisbury and Statesville. That's the Celanese plant in the background. This was one of everybody's favorite early photo opportunities on Asheville trips because it was just a wide open space. Barber Junction is just a mile or so west of here. I didn't Photoshop the sun in this picture. It actually was shining. Riding that New River train. This is actually at Sewell where the tracks came back together in the New River Gorge. And if you remember back, even still had some of the old Safety Express, the Chessie Safety Express coaches still in the yellow and orange. It's no fun to ride the steam trips now if you can't hang out the vestibule. And that's coming under the New River Gorge Bridge at Fayette, West Virginia. If you haven't experienced Bridge Day, I highly suggest you go up and see it at least once, where they shut off the northbound lanes of the bridge, and you can walk all the way across the bridge. And in the center, they put a flatbed trailer there, and that's where the base jumpers climb up on that flatbed trailer and jump into the gorge. Just shy of 900 feet to the river. They jump off with their pilot chute in one hand. They have to wait to clear the bridge structure so they don't get blown back into the bridge, and then open their chute. And if neither chute opens, there's 12 seconds to the river. But we actually were up there one year, standing on the bridge as close to me to that table, with the guys standing right there and jumping off that bridge. But it's usually the third Saturday in October every year. Charleston, West Virginia, again, one of the New River trains. Night shot of 611 in Bluefield. This is the Hinton Depot. This is one of those private charter trips with 765 being serviced, getting ready to run to White Sulphur Springs. This is 4501 in Winston-Salem North Yard, 1985. The Winston-Salem chapter in the southbound Model Railroad Club sponsored an excursion with 4501. This is just north of Reidsville, crossing Highway 158, headed north toward Lynchburg. Another shot of the doubleheader coming down. This is near Oakville, West Virginia. This is Pembroke Tunnel up on the New River. This is 1218 is westbound. This used to be a double track tunnel. It's still single track. And there's access road where the other main line used to be. And we were filming, we shot some pictures here and did video. And after the train went by, 3 cars came out of the tunnel on that. on that access road. They'd been on the other side of the tunnel photographing, and they followed it through the tunnel. Another shot of the anniversary Powhatan era trip at Elliston, Virginia. This is Point Tunnel on the Asheville Loops. This is the first little tunnel out of Old Fort. It's 212 feet long. And yes, we walked through to the other side to get these pictures of it coming up grade. This is 4501 at Pomona Station over in Greensboro. Late night trip getting back, and so we set up and got a night shot of it. This is 4501 at Rocky Mount, Virginia, headed toward Roanoke. And coming into Roanoke on the Winston-Salem line, coming into downtown Roanoke. This doubleheader is leaving Bradford, Virginia, headed back toward Roanoke. This is a good shot of the old East End shops in Roanoke. Give you an idea of some of the track upgrade that was done. Here are the old station platforms, and there used to be several at-grade crossings. The line to the left is the Shenandoah division that goes up toward Hagerstown. And 611's coming in from Lynchburg on the, not on the main line. This was actually one of the station tracks that was still in place at the time. And also Norfolk Southern serviced all the office cars still in Roanoke. That's Randolph Street Tower. You know, it's gone. All this track work has been redone. The shops are now closed and abandoned. This is at Ripple Mead on that rainy trip to Bluefield. I tried a lot to get the N&W signals in a lot of my pictures, even at the time not knowing they would eventually be going away, but it's just so characteristic of the N&W. This was a nice vestibule shot, nice sweeping curve just west of Roanoke. This is the N&W office buildings over here on the right, and the old track work before they straightened everything out. Ronceverte, West Virginia. This is the short private consist coming into Ronceverte on the old C&O. That depot is still there. It's a CSX office maintenance building, but all the platform's still there. We were there just a couple of years ago. This is Highway West Virginia 112, which parallels the old N&W from Oakville, West Virginia to Ingleside. And this is the climb up toward Bluefield. And it kind of weaves around, but the highway follows the track just shy east of Bluefield. But this is the one of the 2-lane roads that during the excursions were made, both lanes were one-way west. There was, Susan would say, see, there's a car coming, because I would be in the left-hand lane going west, against eastbound traffic, trying to jockey for position to get either more pacing footage or get to the next photo location. This is Salem, Virginia. Again, it's Salem, westbound. This is one of my favorite shots. This was at Salisbury, the 611 was being serviced, but rarely did you get to see the engine with a nice coating of road grime. You know, usually they kept it washed, but this looks like it could have been taken in the 50s. And that's at the time, Frank Collins was the main engineer on 611 on the trips. And he got to know Susan and I just because we were trackside so much. Trips to Bluefield, we used to always, the train crew and chasers always ended up at Shoney's in Bluefield after the trips. And the next day they were running from Bluefield through Welch on west. And I caught Frank in Shoney's. And I said, Frank, I said, tomorrow when you go through Welch, can you slow down a little bit so I can get a picture? He said, you're breaking up. I can't hear you. This again was at Salisbury, early morning, putting a train together with 4501 and the FP7s, heading out to Asheville. And there's that same shot with the Celanese plant. This is where Photoshop really comes in handy because this was near dark, cloudy, and we only had Kodachrome 64 or maybe Fuji 100 ISO film, and so the original slide on this was pretty much void of any detail. And you can tell how hard it's raining here. This is that anniversary trip going up Christiansburg grade. But it sure makes for some nice steam pictures. This is at Shawsville, 1218. I would look at magazines, Trains Magazine or old books and see photos like this from the 40s and 50s, and very fortunate that I was able to capture some similar photos in the 1980s. I like this picture. This is 1218 going around the loops up toward Asheville. You got this little dog over here in the left, bottom left, in his backyard. I just imagine he was saying, hey, there's something in our backyard. You need to come out here. You can really see the articulation going around the curve. Again, you can see the hoppers strung out behind 614. This was coming through St. Albans, West Virginia. Early shot of Strasburg Railroad. This is the same 1985 when we were up there. Their 210 number 90 is still, it's down for repair right now, but it one of their main engines still running to this day up on Strasburg. Coming through Thurman, which was a favorite photo spot for excursions. Thurman, West Virginia, really deep into New River Gorge for sure. This is Thurman in 1985 during that January month where they were running 614. And this is when they still, pretty much everything was still in place. They had the wooden engine shed, the pipe stand, water stand, sanding, the old C&O style water tanks. This is the little green and white building here. That's the Thurman Post Office. And that's Main Street, you know, right past those buildings. There's maybe 10 foot of walkway between those building fronts and the track.
When the railroad was built through Thurman, there were no highways to it. So they had a road inside of it that it didn't connect with anything. The only way you could get in and out of Thurman was
Yeah.
on the train.
Unfortunately, right after the Park Service took over Thurman and redid the depot, which is there now, this shop building mysteriously went up in flames in 1993, which is a real shame that it didn't survive.
The post office survives though.
Yep. And they ran a triple header out of Roanoke with a nickel plate 587, 611, and 1218. This is coming through Forest, Virginia, headed toward Lynchburg. And I said, you know, initially I got to ride through my hometown of Welch. And this is just give you an idea. This is not Welch, but this is North Fork, West Virginia. That's Highway 52 on the left, proximity to the double track main line. And you could imagine with the rail fans chasing coal trucks and local traffic on 52, it was a real challenge to take some pictures up through there and keep up with the train. This is Vicar, Virginia, just west of Christiansburg. This is at Walnut Cove, going north toward Roanoke. This was the hopper train that 1218 pulled for the side-by-side run up the mountain for the convention in '87. Here he's dropping it off up at Walden. This was not Photoshopped. This was the actual way the day looked. This is 765 coming into White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia, with that private charter train. Westbound Williamson, just west of Williamson, West Virginia. We had to, this was about, 60, 70 yard walk to get to this tunnel. And we turned right around and ran back to the cars. And at this point, the track all the way to Canova, West Virginia, is at river level. And we never saw the train again. As fast as we could get to the car and as fast as we drove, we never caught it again once he hit the river level. The old Wachovia building, and one more shot of the 2716 in downtown Winston-Salem, still had the old freight station down at Patterson and 3rd Street in downtown Winston. And this was in '82. Another nice, this is at Yards, Virginia, on the westbound trip. (1218) coming into Bluefield, upgrade, putting on a show. This picture, again, taken from the '57 convention, kind of sums up everything that happened and why it happened in the 1980s, the time frame of this show. This gentleman over here on the left with his hand up in the white hat and white shirt, that's Robert Clater, CEO of NS, who was solely responsible for getting 611 out and 1218. And he was running 1218 that day, and they stopped here to let 611 go by to get staged for the side-by-side run up the mountain. But everything happened because of this gentleman and the position he was in. He shut down this part of the railroad for pretty much the whole day, so all these trips could take place. And he was like the rest of us. He was out playing trains, but he was running, playing with the real thing. A lot, we have a lot to be thankful for that he was in the position he was in during that time. That's the end of the train and the end of the show.